Senator Singh.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. It was in 1950 that the UN General Assembly declared the 10th of December as Human Rights Day. This day today was established to bring into focus the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as the standard we should work towards in achieving for all people of the world. Today we acknowledge and celebrate the people who work tirelessly to achieve a global standard in human rights. In Australia, organisations such as Human Rights Watch, the Human Rights Law Centre, Amnesty International Australia, Australian Lawyers for Human Rights and the Caston Centre for Human Rights Law. Many others are included, but in particular I congratulate all of the recipients of the 2013 Human Rights Awards. Our focus on this day remains as relevant in our current world as it was in 1950, as human rights atrocities continue to plague our modern society. In the Congo, state security forces, rebels and foreign armed groups have committed numerous and widespread violations against citizens. War crimes including executions, rapes and child recruitment continue throughout the region. National elections that symbolised a new beginning instead became the focus of acts of violence, with an unknown number of opposition party supporters killed or imprisoned. The simple act of voting became a life and death situation for many civilians. I wish this was an isolated incident, but we can continue to see armed conflict and human rights violations in Darfur, Burma, Tibet, against the Uyghur people, and in many more parts of our globe. In Darfur, the Sudanese government continues to flout international humanitarian law, targeting villages indiscriminately with no regard for hospitals or schools or civilians. Today I want to recognise the impact particularly of human rights on women in the region. Women are targets of sexual assaults and are often shamed by their community. The voice of women is vital for a groundswell of positive action, and we need to help support these women in areas of crisis as they will work towards creating a better community and prospects for themselves and for their children. Human Rights Day is an important reminder for the Parliament to reflect upon the need for further reform of how Australia can protect our own human rights. And today is also about highlighting the importance of international days to embrace all nationalities, cultures, ethnicities and religions. My commitment and support for human rights from work and activities before becoming a senator and my time in this place has continued my resolve to stand up for a just and humane world free of discrimination and for equality. One example of that comes from my involvement with the Australia-Tibet Council. I had the privilege last year of travelling to Dharamsala in India, which is the exiled capital of Tibet. And this experience gave me an undeniable insight into the desperate plight of Tibetans and to understand more fully the human rights abuses taking place in our global community. And again, I had the pleasure this evening of joining some of the Tibetan community here in Australia in Parliament House to recognise the struggles that continue for their families and friends living in Tibet. It was on the 22nd of October 2013 that the UN Human Rights Council reviewed China's human rights record as part of their Universal Periodic Review. This was the second review for China and allowed for a review of the recommendations and pledges made by China during the 2009 session, as well as encompassing a review of the overall human rights record of China. Sadly, from all reports, the overall human rights situation in China, particularly in Tibet, and against also the Uyghur people, has continued to deteriorate over the last 4 years. I take the opportunity to highlight the important region of Xinjiang in China, where the native people of the Uyghurs continue to fight religious intolerance and discrimination. Labelled as terrorists, their plight has become increasingly difficult. But repressive policies and the continuous suppression of fundamental human rights is causing immense suffering. Tibetans have peacefully struggled and held hope of obtaining freedom of religion, freedom to celebrate their culture, their language, and freedom of expression. Since China's first UPR in February 2009, Tibet witnessed its very first self-immolation by a young 20-year-old monk by the name of Taipei. Since that this act of desperation was Tibet's first in its 60-year-long continuous suppression of human rights. Taipei should never have lost his life. He should never have had to resort to such an act. In 2009, the loss of his life was already one too many, and since that time, there has been many, many more. I wish I could report that his life was the only one taken by self-immolations, but they have continued to increase since 2009, and a confounding 122 cases have been confirmed to date. This is no small number, and it clearly shows the desperation and repression of those in Tibet. In what is another constraint to human rights, recent reports confirm friends and relatives of self-immolators are now subject to sentencing by Chinese authorities for alleged association with the self-immolators. Tibet's spiritual leader, His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama, has travelled the globe seeking compassion and peaceful solutions to his country in exile. I once had, again this year, had the privilege to meet His Holiness here in Australia, and his struggle for liberation of Tibet has always strongly opposed, of course, the use of violence. His Holiness understands the power of universal responsibility of all things, and through his leadership, he has actively pursued peaceful solutions to human rights abuses. Today, in fact, is the 24th anniversary of the conferment of the Nobel Peace Prize to His Holiness. In 1989, the Norwegian Nobel Committee declared His Holiness worthy of this prestigious prize. I believe, and many I am sure will agree, his leadership through non-violent action and spiritual guidance to the Tibetan people is most commendable and worthy of global recognition. During his acceptance speech, the Dalai Lama spoke of cultivating a universal responsibility, and I quote, "I believe all suffering is caused by ignorance. People inflict pain on others in the pursuit of their happiness or satisfaction. Yet true happiness comes from a sense of brotherhood and sisterhood. We need to cultivate a universal responsibility for one another and the planet that we share." These words are valuable and worth reflecting on particularly today as we mark Human Rights Day and celebrate that anniversary since the establishment of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Today, as we acknowledge Human Rights Day, we should acknowledge the ongoing struggle of those living in Tibet. We should not only acknowledge but also commit to act on their behalf. Australia recently had the honour of hosting Aung San Suu Kyi, and today I'm reminded of her words, "Please use your liberty to promote ours." Her story is one which should inspire Australians. Despite being placed under house arrest for 15 of the past 21 years, she has continued steadfast her dedication to non-violence and pursuing a democratic and free society for Myanmar. In Australia, Human Rights Day is a day where we can reflect on the rights we enjoy in our country, the rights and freedoms so often taken for granted. But it is also a day where we can make a commitment to be a voice for those who have been silenced and for those we are yet to represent.